His lecture tonight is the culmination of research he conducted while a Mandel Research Fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in 2015 on Jewish communities in the French and Spanish protectorates of Morocco during World War II after the establishment of the Vichy regime. So we are delighted to be able to hear about this fascinating topic and to learn tonight with Daniel Schrader. His talk tonight is entitled Morocco and the Holocaust, the Story of Mohammed V, Protector of the Jews. Please join me in welcoming Daniel.
Thank you very much, Leslie and Rabbi Kravitz, for the wonderful introduction. And I'm really thrilled to be back here. It's not the first time I'm back here, but I wanted to mention that when I first arrived at the University of Minnesota, the first community lecture I did as part of our series was at Adat, so I'm very happy to after a decade to be back here again and addressing your congregation and other members of the public who've come to this lecture tonight. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about what is a book project I'm working on and actually co-authoring with a Moroccan colleague of mine who's at UCLA. So this is a product of our joint work as well as research that I did at the Holocaust Museum in Washington. So we begin with a picture of the headline in a Jewish newspaper in France about the king of Morocco as the protector of the Jews. But I wanted to move to another image. This was in December of 2015 at the ornate B'nai Jeshurun Synagogue in New York. An event took place there to posthumously award King Mohammed V for his courageous resistance to the anti-Jewish legislation of the Vichy government in Morocco. In the presence of Moroccan, Muslim, and Jewish dignitaries and diplomats from the United States and Morocco, and as well as other dignitaries and politicians, the award was received on behalf of King Mohammed VI by Her Highness Princess Lala Hasna, the sister of the king and granddaughter of Mohammed V. The award and ceremony came at the initiative of Peter Geffen, who's the director of a progressive Jewish gap year school. They have a program often with students who graduate high school attend, called Kivunim. And he's also the founder of the liberal Heschel School. It was the first Martin Luther King Jr. Rabbi Abraham Heschel Award made by the school, which declared that Mohammed V, quote, stands for us as a model who did as Dr. King said and risked his position, prestige, and even life for the welfare of others. Speeches were delivered, and the words of King Mohammed VI were read in praise of Mohammed V, Mohammed VI being his grandson, current king of Morocco, and praising him for his benevolence towards the Jews. There was something, I think, especially poignant about the ceremony, with Jewish and Muslim leaders of both countries present in a synagogue for an award to a Muslim king for his heroic actions which took place during the Holocaust, when Jews faced the biggest peril in history. For liberal American Jews, I think that what was so compelling about the event is that amid the unresolvable conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, and with no end in sight for the violence and hatred that the conflict engenders, and with Holocaust denial seemingly prevalent, or fairly common at least, in parts of the Muslim world, recognizing a Muslim king of an Arab state who took great risks in protecting Jews gives hope against the bleaker landscape of despair. The Kingdom of Morocco is unique in the Arab Muslim world in officially endorsing Holocaust education and in unequivocally condemning anti-Semitism, as it did at a meeting this past September at a special session on anti-Semitism at UNESCO, when the Moroccan Prime Minister, Saad ad-Din Othmani, perhaps ironically from the Islamist Justice and Development Party, read the comments of King Mohammed VI that condemned anti-Semitism in no uncertain terms. There was not a word in his comments of expressing moral equivalency between Israeli actions towards Palestinians and anti-Semitism, as would have been more common among leaders in other Arab countries. I have to say I've given much thought to what all this means over the last week as we mourn the horrific slaughter at the synagogue at Pittsburgh, facing the terror of the event and the despair that the causes of this heinous anti-Semitic attack will only continue. Jews, I think, take some solace in the outpouring of support that came from the non-Jewish religious communities. And the outspoken and unequivocal words and actions of the Muslim communities in support of the Jews in Pittsburgh and across the country, including, I know, at the vigil at Mount Zion and St. Paul, I think has been particularly meaningful. For against the narrative of Muslim and Jew as implacable enemies, the outpouring of support and heartfelt grief brings hope for a more peaceful future. That Morocco has been the exception among Muslim Arab states in its official position towards the Jews, and its acknowledgement that Jews were an integral part of the country, which is even stated in the Constitution, the Moroccan Constitution of 2011, has struck a responsive chord among liberal American Jews. And here, I know that Adat just returned from a congregational tour to Morocco, and in fact there are dozens of Jewish tours of Morocco every year, organized by Reform and conservative congregations across the U.S. If I would hazard a guess, and perhaps someone here could correct me, perhaps Rabbi Kravitz would know the answer to this, but I would not be surprised at all that if all the countries in the world, Morocco is probably only second to Israel in the number of organized Jewish congregational tours in recent years. You know, maybe I may be wrong with this, but or I may be biased in making that comment, but I think that apart from the interest in visiting a fascinating country, what is perhaps even more significant is that it is a Muslim country, which make these trips what I would call, perhaps at a very subtle and unconscious level, what I might call voyages of hope. For Morocco, tourism is vitally important economically, and Jewish tourism is also significant politically. The exceptionality of Morocco's positive attitude towards the Jews in the Muslim world is also officially promoted, and the most compelling, oft-repeated story that symbolizes the exceptional nature of Morocco's pro-Jewish stance is that Mohammed V, the father of Morocco's independence, saved Jews during the Holocaust. The story of Mohammed V is not only meaningful, of course, for liberal Jews in the United States or for the Moroccan rulers, it has also been important for Israel's leaders. On July 21st, 2007, Shimon Peres, the president of Israel, declared his support for the nomination of Mohammed V as righteous among the nations to the state of Israel's official Holocaust institution, Yad Vashem. This was less than a week after his inauguration as the 9th president of Israel, and one of his very first public causes. During his long political career, Peres was at the forefront of Israeli-Moroccan relations, sometimes secret, sometimes these were public meetings. As we see here, this was a public meeting of Shimon Peres with King Hassan II in Rabat, in Morocco. And he fostered close ties to Hassan II, the son of Mohammed V and father of the current king, and to a number of Moroccan Jewish leaders as well. These ties were important economically, militarily, and politically. Morocco served as an important mediator between Israel and the Arab world, and was one of the venues for meetings that were to lead to negotiations, both first with the Egyptians and then with the Palestinians. Shimon Peres's declaration in support of the nomination of King Mohammed V to Yad Vashem therefore did not come out of a vacuum, and it followed a meeting with Serge Berdugo, the kingdom's ambassador at large, Jewish ambassador at large, and head of the Moroccan Jewish community, and André Azoulay, the advisor in the royal cabinet of King Mohammed VI. Berdugo led the initiative to have Mohammed V recognized for the award by Yad Vashem. However, the initiative did not go very far. So we were curious to find out what actually happened when the proposal was being made to Yad Vashem. And in June of 2015, together with my colleague Omar Boom, we interviewed Irena Steinfeld, then director of the Righteous Among the Nations Department at Yad Vashem. Steinfeld explained to us the independent procedure that Yad Vashem follows, that was free from the influence of politicians or any political influence, according to what she told us. For nominations to be considered, it had to go through an independent team of legal experts, Supreme Court judges, and historians. And the candidate needed to meet the objective criteria established by Yad Vashem. With regard to Mohammed V, as Steinfeld told us, the only question to be considered is whether he fits the criteria of a righteous, a non-Jew who helps Jews, someone who risked himself in order to help the Jew. Yad Vashem remains skeptical that historical proof exists that Mohammed V took those steps, took those risks, indeed endangered himself so that he would be qualified to be among the righteous, among the nations. Though Mohammed V has not been enshrined among the righteous Gentiles by Yad Vashem, many Moroccan Jews and Muslims have adopted the term righteous among the nations to describe the king's heroic actions during World War II. But above all, the story has resonated among the far-flung Moroccan Jewish diaspora. The reasons for the appeal of this story, however, has much to do with Moroccan Jewish ethnic identity, and especially ethnic politics in Israel. Before the era of mass migration of Jews from Morocco, there was something like 270,000 Jews in the country, the largest of any country in the Muslim world. The largest number of immigrants settled in Israel, followed by France and then Canada. In Israel, descendants of Moroccan Jews number about 1 million inhabitants, the largest group from any country in Israel, with the exception of Russia and the former Soviet Union. The attitudes of the dominant, some images here from the age of immigration. The attitude of the dominant European Ashkenazi population in Israel towards Moroccan Jews in Israel were very negative. This aversion was produced in the age of the mass immigration of Mizrahi Jews, when many in the European political elites were deeply anxious about the demographic shift taking place as masses of Jews from Muslim countries were immigrating, and especially worried about the capacity to integrate the North Africans, that followed the mass immigration of first the Yemenites and then the Iraqi Jews. Most of the Moroccan Jews were settled in the development towns on Israel's peripheries, in the northern borders and in the southern edges of the Negev desert. Moroccan Jews were considered to be culturally like the Arab enemy, or primitive, as Africans, or blacks, as they were sometimes called. North African Jews were subject to quotas. It was called selexia in 1951, the only group that was singled out for this official government policy. It was a short-lived policy that ended in 1953 amid tremendous acrimony and political debate, but nevertheless it engendered much bitterness, and this bitterness on the discrimination and marginalization of Moroccan Jews in Israel has remained. As a consequence, during the first 2 decades of the State of Israel, being from Morocco was a stigma, and Jews from Morocco were made to feel shame about their background. In the 1970s and the 1980s, this began to change as Moroccan Jews began to protest their position in society, and a kind of ethnic revival also occurred. Ethnic politics also was a major factor, and increasingly political parties began to play the ethnic cards in elections. This is actually something I witnessed in 1979. One of the Moroccan distinctive Moroccan practices is the Mimouna celebration, which marked the end of Passover for Moroccans, and it was kind of revived as a major event in Israel. So, as the ethnic aspect of politics began to increase, politicians would go to these ceremonies and make a presence. So here we see Prime Minister Menachem Begin at the Mimouna celebration in Jerusalem at that time. The other interesting thing, though, about this period of this ethnic, you could say, revival and the sort of politicization of the ethnic vote in Israel was it also coincided with the development of Moroccan-Israeli relations, and this also gave greater legitimacy to being a Moroccan. Being a Moroccan Israeli was becoming a source of pride and a part of the Israeli narrative rather than a stigma, as the Moroccan monarchy came to be regarded as a friend of the Jews. Again, here's an image of the young Hassan II in the Jewish community in Morocco. There is also another dimension to this development that is important. Moroccan nationality law is based on the principle of perpetual allegiance, which meant that Moroccans and their descendants, including Jews in the diaspora, were considered to be Moroccan nationals entitled to citizenship. Therefore, the king of Morocco regarded the Jews of the diaspora, including in Israel, as his subjects. As Israeli-Moroccan relations developed in the 1970s during the reign of Hassan II, the king began to make pro-Jewish pronouncements, even welcoming Jews back to the country. And while only a few chose to return to live in Morocco, thousands of Moroccan Jews began to travel there, visiting their places of origin and going on pilgrimage to the many shrines of the tzaddikim, or holy men, a practice that was very common in Morocco. And in this way, many Jews of Moroccan origin reconnected to what was becoming again their homeland. This reconnection with Morocco was also accompanied with the reaffirmation of a special connection to the Moroccan monarchy. During casual conversations I have had in Israel through the years, when people learn that I'm interested in Moroccan Jews, they often joke that every Moroccan they have met worked for the king as a cook or tailor or jeweler. The satire about Moroccan Jews and the monarchy, I realize, is kind of condescending. For we live in an age when kings and queens are regarded as vestiges of the past. But for the Moroccans, the emotional connection to the king is real. One Moroccan Israeli friend told me that when King Hassan II died in 1999, he wept with inexplicable sorrow. Once Moroccan Israelis recreated a connection with their country of origin, the veneration of the king was empowering against their background of a lower social status and their marginalization in Israeli society, even though in concrete terms, of course, the king had really no power over or control over their lives. So it is in this manner that the story of Mohammed V, the savior of the Jews, was reborn among the hundreds of thousands of Moroccan Jews of the diaspora. The idea that the Jews of Morocco were spared from the worst excesses of Vichy's anti-Semitic laws because of Mohammed V's heroic actions thus became a part of the collective memory of Moroccan Jews throughout their dispersion in North America, in France, in Israel, elsewhere. An official part of but also an official part of the public discourse of the monarchy, political circles as well in Morocco and among Muslim intellectuals. It is represented by the much-touted comment attributed to Mohammed V during World War II in voicing his opposition to anti-Jewish laws. He was supposed to have said, "There are no Jews in Morocco, only Moroccan subjects." And there are a number of other versions of this statement, or perhaps he stated it more than once in somewhat different ways. In any event, while the story is well known among Moroccans, it is not generally part of the Holocaust narrative, nor is it included in the general histories of the Holocaust that focused on Europe. Morocco was, after all, a country that was spared the horrors of the German occupation and Nazi extermination of the Jews. However, North African Jews were directly affected by the war and the same anti-Semitic laws that were implemented in France. During World War II, the French protectorates of Morocco and Tunisia and Algeria, Algeria was actually considered a department of France, and Morocco and Tunisia were under French protectorates. What happened during World War II is it became a part of the Vichy regime. So this was the French collaborationist government that was formed under the Marshal Pétain after the fall of France in June 1940. The armistice signed with Germany, which divided France between the occupied zone and the unoccupied zone, with its headquarters in Vichy, enabled the French military command and administration in North Africa to remain intact and in control of its colonies, becoming in effect a part of the Vichy regime. For 2.5 years, the French colonial Vichy government implemented, with only a very few modifications, the Nazi-inspired anti-Semitic statute for the Jews and other discriminatory laws of exclusion enacted by the authorities in metropolitan France. Between 1940 and 1942, anti-Jewish legislation excluded Jews from all public offices and a wide range of occupations, and imposed numerous clauses, kind of severely restricting the number of Jews in public schools and greatly reducing those who were allowed to work in the liberal professions. These anti-Jewish measures that were implemented by the French colonial authorities not only imposed considerable hardship on the Jewish communities, but shocked the Jewish community who felt deeply betrayed by France and French ideals. There were also anti-Jewish measures that were specific to the colonies. The Jews of Algeria were immediately stripped of their French citizenship, which had been granted to them by the, didn't transition to this map, so you see the North Africa here. So the Jews of Algeria were stripped of their citizenship, which had been granted to them by the Crémieux Decree of 1870. The Crémieux Decree had caused great resentment among the European settler communities in Algeria, which saw Jews as competitors for their privileged status. Anti-Semitism was rife among the European settlers across North Africa. It is therefore not so surprising that the Vichy government abrogated the Crémieux Decree as one of its very first anti-Semitic acts that it implemented. For Algerian Jews, it meant that they would be regarded as indigenous subjects of France, like the Muslim population, which also had been denied political and civil rights. And so Jews now were stripped of their rights, to vote as citizens and so forth as a result of this. And it was a tremendous blow to the Jews of Algeria, who had vested their interests and faith in the principles of France and the French Republic. Morocco, however, was different because already Jews there were considered to be indigenous subjects of the Sultan and Moroccan citizens. Many Jewish leaders in Morocco had campaigned for years to acquire French citizenship, as had their co-religionists in Algeria, and which they felt would improve their status and help with their social advancement in society. But the authorities of the French Protectorate, which was established in 1912, were adamantly opposed. And in French colonial thinking, the granting of citizenship to the Jews of Algeria was a terrible mistake. Better to leave the Jews as subjects of Morocco and thus subservient to French colonial rule. Though under French colonial rule during the war, Morocco was formally and regarded as a sovereign country, ruled by a sovereign, a sultan, who was a sharif meaning the belief that he was descended from the prophet Mohammed, and a member of the Alawid dynasty that dated back to the 17th century. The Sharifian ruler during the war was Sultan Mohammed ben Yusuf, later called King Mohammed V, whose reign began in 1927. And there's a well-known photograph of him on the year of his ascension to the throne. Actually, there's an error. He was not Mohammed IV. Actually, he was Mohammed V in the dynasty. But nevertheless, the picture is a very good one, so I like to use it nevertheless. And although the Sultan was largely a figurehead and an instrument of the French to legitimize their colonial domination of the country, the Sultan was able to use his credentials and symbolic capital as a Muslim and dynastic ruler to confront the French, eventually leading Morocco to independence in 1956. The Moroccan protectorate remained, in theory, sovereign country, divided into three zones. There was a French zone, and then a much smaller Spanish protectorate in the north, and the international zone of Tangier. In this territorial division of Morocco, France was the dominant power, much to the frustration of Spain, a rather weak imperial power in the 20th century. Rather than abolishing the Moroccan Alawid dynasty, the French authorities, especially through the influential policies of the first resident general, Hubert Lyautey, recreated the Moroccan state and employed Moroccans in new ministries and offices, all of which were basically subordinate to French rule. However, the French protectorate itself legitimized its rule based on the perpetuation of the dynasty and the Sultan as a figurehead, who would rubber stamp decrees, which were called dahirs, that were basically prepared by the French authorities and then translated into Arabic. The policy, therefore, was to discreetly control this state apparatus under the guise of protecting and respecting indigenous culture and its institutions, while at the same time disempowering the Moroccans. So Mohammed V's reign began when he was 16, after he had spent a rather this is a little bit when he's a decade later with his son and future king Hassan II. He had spent pretty much a cloistered childhood in the palace. The French, of course, had hoped that the monarchy would be a complacent and obedient instrument of the rule. But during the war years, the Jewish policy of Vichy constituted a challenge to the system of government and a means in which Mohammed V could assert himself as a leader in ways that I think have been really overlooked by scholars. The resident general in Morocco when France fell in June 1940 was Charles Nogues, again we see in this picture. He had been appointed by the Popular Front government of the Jewish Socialist Prime Minister Leon Blum. After the Vichy government was established, Nogues considered resigning, but in the end he continued in his post, and because he was really a loyal agent of French Empire. And although Nogues clearly had anti-Semitic views and was not in principle opposed to discrimination against Jews, he also was not that enthusiastic about the French national revolution advanced by Vichy leaders, and resented the undermining of the Residency's authority, that is, the Residency being the office of the Resident General, because he saw this as basically working against French imperial interest in Morocco. Nevertheless, Nogues was required to promulgate as dahirs, as royal decrees in Morocco, the racist and discriminatory statute for the Jews of the Metropolitan Vichy government of 1940 and 1941. And the Sultan signed both the first and then later the revised decree. The 1940 dahir, with its devastating discriminatory measures against the Jews, in almost all respects replicated the Metropolitan law, with one significant and highly symbolic difference. The law distinguished between non-Moroccan Jews defined by race, that is, anyone with 3 Jewish grandparents, and Moroccan Jews who were defined by religion. So if you were a Jew and a Moroccan, then you were defined as a Jew. And for those of you who, basically that's what it says in this document. This is the official publication of the Protectorate. The distinction between Moroccan and non-Moroccan Jews was advocated by both the Residency and the Sultan in the face of pressures from Vichy to apply the racial definition to all Jews regardless of their nationality. Mohammed V's objections to defining Jews racially was not based on the belief in complete equality between Muslims and Jews, as some have argued, nor on humanitarian principles, but on Islamic precepts that required the Muslim ruler to protect his Jewish subjects. The racial definition of Jews would undermine his role as Amir al-Mu'mineen, the commander of the faithful, the sovereign Muslim ruler who was duty-bound to protect, and uphold Islamic law, with the principle that he was also bound to protect his protected subjects, or dhimmi subjects, the Jews. The crucial issue for the Sultan was that of Jewish-born converts to Islam. If the racial criteria were legislated, it would imply that Muslim converts and their offspring would be regarded as Jews and subject to the anti-Jewish legislation. This constituted a fundamental challenge to the Sultan's sovereignty and even to Islam itself. But in 1941, Vichy's anti-Semitic policy was intensified following the creation of the General Commissariat for Jewish Questions in metropolitan France, with Xavier Vallat at its head. And this was to have repercussions in Morocco. And here we see the new measures concerning the Jews, the headline in the highly censored Moroccan daily newspaper. The new anti-Semitic laws, basically, the new statute of the Jews, that is, for the Jews, replaced the law of 1940. And it was adapted in Morocco by Dahir on August 5th, 1941. Again, reported in the newspaper here. The new anti-Semitic law greatly expanded the excluded professions and imposed the numerous clauses, severely restricting the number of Jews, again, in different professions. The revised Dahir eliminated the separate definition, however, as well, on Moroccan Jews based on their religion, applying the racial definition to Moroccan and non-Moroccan Jews alike. However, Nogues, the Resident General, was able to negotiate one very important distinction between Moroccan and non-Moroccan Jews. Moroccans were permitted to continue to practice traditional artisanal activities in the retail trade, out of concern that banning Jews from these professions would destabilize the economy and thus undermine the strength of colonial rule. In conjunction with this dahir and following metropolitan Vichy policy, another decree ordered a census of Moroccan Jews, which required Jews to submit a declaration of their civil and family status, profession, and property. The census greatly alarmed the Jewish community, for its intent was the eventual Aryanization of Jewish property that would accompany the closure of Jewish-owned businesses. Aryanization was, in fact, the term that was used for expropriating property, of de-Judifying, as if you will, the economy. Intent on seeing Vichy's Jewish policy carried out in North Africa to ensure that both the residency and the Mahsan were in line and would enforce the new measures, Valad traveled to Morocco shortly after the revised dahirs were promulgated. And here we see him meeting with the Sultan, Mohammed V, or the future Mohammed V, in Rabat. On August 19th, Valad went to the imperial palace where, as it was reported, they were received with the traditional ceremonial manner and solemn audience with His Majesty the Sultan, unquote. Other high military and civilian officials in Morocco, as well as task officers of the cabinet, of the commissariat of the Jewish questions, also participated in the audience with the Sultan. From Rabat, Valad traveled with his party to Fez, where he was welcomed by the French military and civilian leaders, the local Muslim governor, and the local president and representatives of the fascist Légion des Combattants, the Legionnaires, Veterans Legionnaires organization. The entourage then proceeded to the Mellah, the name of the Jewish quarter of Fez, which I'm sure some of you who were on the tour visited. And here, the Pasha presented to Valad and the chief rabbis and committee members of the Jewish community and notables of the Jewish section of the city council, the Majlis al-Baladi. The procession then strolled through the Mellah and amid throngs of people. And then at a meeting hall of the community, Valad addressed an assembly of Jewish notables where he was reported to have declared, "The task, as you know, is to devise steps to be taken here as elsewhere, not to persecute you, but to eliminate from certain aspects of our economic life the Jews who have overrun our political life," unquote. Xavier Valad's visit to Fez could not have been more alarming to the Moroccan Jewish community. The very same day of his visit, a decree ordering Moroccan Jews to evacuate the European quarters of the cities and to return to the Mellahs was announced. Whether or not the dahir was at the instigation of Valad, the French protectorate authorities, or the Mahsan, the Moroccan authorities, is unknown, but it is certain that Valad was privy to the discussions. In Valad's brief visit to Morocco, he brought pressure to bear both on the residency and the Sultan in Rabat, then proceeded to Fez, the most important center of both the Muslim and Jewish spiritual leadership, to intimidate the Jews, accompanied both by the French authorities and the Muslim governor. The inconceivable had now happened, and whatever faith the Jewish leadership may have had in the residency in protecting their community must have been dashed. Undoubtedly feeling the futility of appealing to the French authorities a few weeks after Valad's visit, the Jewish leaders of Fez invoked the traditional protection of the Sultan in the ritual sacrifice of 4 oxen, one at the gate of the imperial palace, another at the shrine where Mullah Yusuf, the father of the Sultan, was buried, and 2 at the Sharifian shrine of Mullah Idris, the founder of Fez in the 9th century. The ritual sacrifice and supplication for the protection of the Sultan by the Jewish notables was followed by other appeals and meetings, sometimes in secret, between members of the Jewish community and the Sultan, Jewish leaders continued to express their unflinching loyalty to France, for their future was uncertain. The future of French authority was uncertain. Although the French still wielded the power in Morocco, at the same time they saw the advantages of affirming their position as dhimmi subjects, as protected subjects according to Islamic law, under his protection, under the protection of the Sultan. The anti-Semitic dahirs of 1941 were followed by more decrees that regulated the application of the anti-Semitic measures. And yet, the application of the laws was uneven, often depending on local circumstances and the attitudes of individual authorities, who were given some leniency in considering different exemptions from the laws. Between August 1941 and November 1942, when the Allies invaded and occupied Morocco, the Residency eased the impact of the laws by countless delays and was constantly criticized, in fact, for not applying the anti-Semitic laws with rigor by Vichy's staunchest supporters, especially among the European settler community in Morocco. After the Allied landings in November of 1942, Nogues managed to remain in his post for over a half a year. The French authorities exploited the Sultan's protector story in order to distance themselves from Vichy and to demonstrate that they had endeavored to mitigate the impact of the anti-Jewish laws. Yet the anti-Jewish laws were not eliminated immediately after the Allied landings in Morocco. And here we see this was actually the landing in North Africa was the entry, you could say, of the United States in the war, because it was from North Africa that they continued to Italy and Europe. And so these were really the first battles of the Second World War. And here we see a very famous meeting between the leaders of, you see, de Gaulle and Roosevelt together with Mohammed V in Casablanca in January of 1943. Sorry, did I say? Yeah. Churchill and Roosevelt. It wasn't de Gaulle, but there was another, there was another high French official of the Free French who was present at that meeting as well. I forgot who it was exactly. Yeah, thank you. As the American troops sought to stabilize their position in Morocco and Algeria at the same time that the battle for Tunisia was raging, right? This was, again, the first American military engagement with the Axis powers in World War II, which was fought over the Battle of Tunisia and then Libya as well. The American military command was anxious to secure the cooperation of the French authorities in place, that is, those who were already in place, even though they had been servants of the Vichy government. Local French officials were worried that repealing the anti-Semitic legislation would jeopardize their ability to maintain their control over the Muslim population, a concern which also influenced the American forces, whose main concern was gaining military control over North Africa. It was over 4 months following mounting pressure, including from President Roosevelt himself, that General Henri Giraud, the French High Commissioner in North Africa, reluctantly appealed the anti-Jewish legislation. In June 1943, the French Committee of National Liberation under de Gaulle took control in Algiers, and the leaders of Vichy's administration in North Africa were removed. It was in the interest of the new colonial administration to disassociate itself from the racial discrimination implemented by Vichy, as former officials were being weeded out from their positions. The promotion of the idea that the Sultan mitigated the impact of Vichy's anti-Semitic legislation thus served to legitimize the reassertion of colonial authority, which was still based on the perpetuation of the monarchy, but was now facing the independence movement, marked by the foundation of the Istiqlal, or Independence Party, at the end of 1943 in Morocco. The Sultan was well aware of the value to French colonialism, of the image of the monarchy protecting the Jews, but subtly used it for a different purpose. As the tides turned after the Americans landed in North Africa, the connection between Germany and the nationalists was weakened, Well, the Sultan was reasserting himself as the symbol of the Moroccan nation and national leader, while at the same time invoking the Americans' call for self-determination as a way to assert his independence from the French. The Sultan's image of protector of all his subjects, Muslim and Jews, was a powerful symbol of national unity. After 1943, he was able to effectively use this position to elevate the monarchy in the national struggle, and after independence, reclaim the position of the Alawid dynasty as more than just symbolic rulers, which the nationalist political parties had hoped for, and to maintain the reins of coercive state power through the support of the military, a situation that continues to this day. The story of Mohammed V's protection of the Jews during Vichy was also crucial for the legitimation of incorporating Jews into the emerging nation as citizens of independent Morocco when the protectorate came to an end in 1956. The nationalist political parties were much more divided. Go back to the map of Morocco. The nationalist parties were much more divided about the idea of incorporating Jews into the nation. The Moroccan nationalist movement began to develop in the 1930s at a time when the conflict in Palestine was intensifying, and many joined in solidarity with Arab nationalists in the Middle East in support of the Palestinian Arabs. At the same time, with the rise of the Third Reich, the Germans began to support pan-Arab and pan-Islamic nationalists in an effort to undermine the position of the British and the French, the dominant colonial powers in the Middle East. While it is still an unanswered question, very difficult to gauge how much Nazi anti-Semitic propaganda influenced the thinking of Arab nationalists in Morocco, there is little doubt that the Palestine issue galvanized the Arab nationalists throughout the Middle East and North Africa. Furthermore, when the French authorities cracked down on the Moroccan nationalists in 1936 to 1937, many of the leaders took refuge in the northern Spanish zone, where the nationalists already had a strong presence. The Spanish allowed the Moroccan nationalists more freedom in their anti-French campaign, if only to weaken the position of France in pursuit of Spain's own imperialist aims in Morocco. The Spanish, for the same reason, also allowed the Germans to operate in their zone, and the Nazis began to support and fund nationalists based in Tetuan, which was the capital of the Spanish protectorate. And from there, in turn, they disseminated anti-French and sometimes Nazi anti-Semitic propaganda in both zones. That the Spanish zone became the center of Nazi influence and the principal hub of Moroccan nationalist activity was also because the Francoists had seized control of the Spanish protectorate. The rebellion of 1936 that had led to the civil war in Spain began in Morocco, where the Spanish nationalists, as they were called, or as they called themselves, quickly took control and began their reign of terror. It was from Morocco that, with the support of both Hitler and Mussolini, that the nationalists launched their attack against the Republic in the mainland. Franco quickly proclaimed his support, for example, of Abdelkhalik Torres, the leader of the Moroccan Hizb al-Islah al-Watani, the National Reform Party. The memory of World War II, when many nationalist leaders had connections with Nazi Germany, when tensions between Muslims and Jews in Morocco after the birth of Israel were becoming more pronounced, made it difficult for Jews to identify with the national movement. Fearful of their fate in an independent country led by the nationalists, the story of the king as protector during the war created a powerful bond between the Jews and the monarchy, allowing them a place in and identity with independent Morocco, and many Jews remained there after 1956, after the year of independence. Yet this bond alone was not enough to prevent the flight of Jews from Morocco, which began en masse in the years that followed the end of the French rule. After 1956, Mohammed V blocked Jewish emigration to Israel, not only because he did not want to lose an important element of the population, but also because of pressures from the Arab world in which Morocco was a part of, and it joined the Arab League with independence and so forth. The policy only ended after the catastrophic sinking of the Pisces, a ship that was clandestinely bringing immigrants from Morocco to Israel in 1961. Its sinking became an important episode in the struggle of Moroccan Jews for aliyah, to immigrate to Israel. Among the Moroccan immigrant communities in Israel, a competing narrative emerges with the king as protector story, that Mohammed V during the war was unable to protect the Jewish population. After all, he did sign the anti-Jewish Dahirs, hardly a heroic act, as many have claimed. As part of the Zionist narrative, it was only Israel that could provide protection and refuge. The contested memory of the protector king cast doubt on the king's role during World War II. With little concrete evidence, the story of Mohammed V's defense of the Jews during World War II was rejected by some scholars and Moroccan Jews in the 1970s and 1980s, when the story was becoming revived again in Morocco and Israel and in the Moroccan Jewish diaspora. Though there was evidence of secret meetings, as I talked about, between Jewish leaders and the Sultan, who gave them assurances that he would protect his Jewish subjects and their property. Yet, in light of the fact that the Sultan, at least in theory, signed the anti-Jewish statutes, some harder evidence was needed. The harder evidence now. In 1985, the late David Cohen, a Moroccan-Israeli researcher, discovered a telegram at the French Foreign Ministry archives at the Quai d'Orsay in Paris, the French Foreign Ministry archives. The telegram was allegedly sent by a French journalist to the French Foreign Ministry in May 1941, on the eve of the new, more vicious, revised statute of the Jews. And it describes how the Sultan, here in translation, how the Sultan used the occasion of the Throne Day banquet, an annual event that developed in the 1930s to mark the accession to the throne, to publicly repudiate the anti-Jewish laws and embarrass the French. Defiantly inviting the Jews to be prominent at the ceremony, as the telegram reported, the Sultan proclaimed that they were under his protection and not to be distinguished from other subjects. David Cohen published his findings, but his findings were buried in the acts of the World Congress of Jewish Studies. We always complain about how our articles get published in acts of different conferences and no one ever reads them. Although he did publish also a short article in a French newspaper, but no one paid much attention to it. However, he also gave a copy to Haim Zafrani. For full disclosure here, he was one of my teachers, many years ago, and I also taught with him in his department. So in deconstructing the story, I feel a little bit of guilt towards my former teacher. It was Zafrani, in fact, who took the initiative, and David Cohen never really got the credit for finding the document, and rather ceremoniously presented the document to the Royal Academy of Morocco. The document presented by Haim Zafrani has been reproduced, excerpted, and quoted in dozens of publications and websites, thus promoting over the last 3 decades the official narrative of Mohammed V's benevolence toward the Jews during World War II. The telegram is even represented at the UN's outreach program about the Holocaust as evidence of the peaceful coexistence between Muslims and Jews. Surprisingly, no one has questioned the veracity of what the telegram reported. I've discovered, in fact, that the telegram is what we like to call today fake news. When I wrote about this, I didn't use the term because that was a couple years ago. People weren't using the term so much, but thought I might as well use it now. I have actually found no corroborating evidence, and further, of the story. Going through the newspapers of the period and the official documents, almost everything that the Sultan did, day to day, was recorded. Every ceremony. There was no ceremony to be found. Furthermore, the throne day was on November 18th, not in May. This was the date of his accession to the throne. And finally, the event is implausible, for even if the reported declaration reflected the Sultan's position, which it probably did, he had to tread carefully if he wanted to avoid being deposed by the French. The telegram itself appears to be well scripted, written by a journalist from the French press service that served as an instrument of control and the dissemination of propaganda under Vichy. The most plausible reason for the fabrication of the story was to discredit the Sultan as rebellious and to embarrass the resident general, Nogues, who was intensely disliked by many of the European settlers, especially the members of the Légionnaires, the Légion Française, des Anciens Combattants, right, the Veterans Organization, which served as a spearhead for Vichy's fascist national revolution. It can recall also that Nogues had been an appointee of Léon Blum, and therefore, of course, very mistrusted. He was often denounced to Vichy by the Légionnaires for not fully implementing the anti-Jewish laws. The author of the telegram, therefore, may have been attempting to induce the metropolitan Vichy authorities to assert themselves more strongly in Moroccan affairs in favor of the European settlers by representing the Sultan as displaying too much power. While the telegram fabricated the news, it did, of course, reveal that the French themselves were disseminating information about the Sultan's opposition to the anti-Jewish measures. But decades after the telegram was produced, it came to be used to tell a different story, the exceptional bond of solidarity between Muslims and Jews in Morocco, and the love of the Moroccan dynasty for its Jewish subjects. This is an anachronistic use of the evidence, as laudable as the intention might be. The story of Mohammed V's protection of the Jews was becoming a Holocaust story. It is believed by many that Mohammed V's intervention prevented the deportation of Moroccan Jews to the death camps in Europe. And there are other stories which develop about the king wearing when ordered for Jews to wear the yellow star, he demanded of the authorities that they bring another 50 yellow stars for himself and for the royal family, sort of imitating the story of the King of Denmark, another kind of legend of the Holocaust. So it's becoming now increasingly, you could say, a Holocaust story. Of course, as a historian, and I forgot to mention here, here you're looking at a poster that was hung at a cinema marking the oath of allegiance of the Légionnaires with Marshal Pétain, the head of the Vichy government, in the background. Tens of thousands of people, there were maybe 10,000 at least people in the streets of Casablanca at that time. So you could see the position of the resident general was no fan of theirs, was kind of compromised. In any event, as an historian, I think it is important to take an analytical distance from your subject, yet I can't really claim to be totally detached either. Word of our research has spread. I first presented some of my research publicly at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in front of a large audience that included the Moroccan ambassador and prominent Moroccan Jewish leaders. The King of Morocco and current, and I should say they weren't very happy with how I presented the story. That's a whole other story. It was a little bit of a scandal that resulted from my talk at the time. Also, the King of Morocco and the current ambassador to the U.S., who is a member of the royal family and granddaughter of Mohammed V, are waiting anxiously for our book and what it will reveal. For the story is important for the Moroccan state. It puts a liberal and tolerant face on Morocco, an authoritarian monarchy with close ties to the United States. Well, during and after World War II, the story was important for defining the monarchy as the symbol of the emerging nation free from colonial rule. In the 21st century, the story has become the symbol of Moroccan tolerance, a contrast with other parts of the Muslim world. As Morocco forges its ties to the West, it thus poses the question, are we, as historians and researchers, also becoming a part of the very story that we are analyzing? And so, to return to the ceremony of the synagogue in New York, where I began my talk, there is a backstory. Kivunim has been partnering with a Muslim student club in Morocco called Mimouna, which was founded in 2007 in Al Hawain University in Ifran, a small resort town in the Middle Atlas Mountains of Morocco. It was Morocco's first student club devoted to celebrating the country's Jewish history and heritage. The name Mimouna was chosen, again, as I mentioned, after the traditional Moroccan Jewish post-Passover celebration that welcomes the return of leavened bread. It was also a time when Muslim neighbors would bring wheat and food items to the Jews to prepare for their feast, a symbol of peaceful coexistence between the two faith communities. The Mimouna festival has become the most important symbol of Moroccan Jewish identity in Israel. The Moroccan Mimouna Club has also advocated the importance of Holocaust education in Morocco and has adopted the story of Mohammed V as protector of the Jews to legitimize their cause. In September of 2011, the club attracted international attention after its members organized a conference at Al Hawain University to commemorate the Shoah, and this is what you see in this poster. And of course, it focused on the record of King Mohammed V during World War II, celebrating him as righteous among the nations. Of course, an honor that was denied to him by Yad Vashem. A year after the Holocaust conference, 16 members of the club took a trip to Israel, organized in collaboration with Kivunim, where they had a first-hand experience of daily encounters between Jews and Muslims. Before the award event, Peter Geffen of Kivunim consulted with us on the statement that was to be issued announcing the ceremony. Parts of the statement that he had drafted were historically inaccurate. It suggested that Nazis, together with the French, were in control of Morocco, and that because of the Sultan's protection, not a single Jew was killed in the Holocaust. The statement was changed slightly as a result of our suggestion. Later, Geffen, without questioning our findings, said to us, "It is a good story, and this I cannot deny, for it is a hopeful tale that Muslim-Jewish coexistence is possible." Thank you. I hope I've not gone on for too long, but I'm happy to entertain questions or comments. Yes.
So I suppose from what you're indicating that the Jews prior to the 20th century did or didn't have a positive, reinforced relationship with the Moroccans, the Muslim Moroccans, which as I understood were called Berbers and not Arabs. Would you comment about that, please?
Okay. First of all, Moroccans are a blend. That is, Moroccan Muslims are a blend of both Arabs and Berbers. Berbers were the indigenous population before the Arabs arrived. So most Arabs probably had some Berber origin. But in any event, Moroccans are you could say, both Arabs and Berbers. And the state of Morocco declares itself as a Muslim Arab state. Some Berbers don't like that. But as far as the earlier relationship between Muslims and Jews in Morocco and their attitudes towards the monarchy in, let's say, before the colonial period, You know, it was certainly a mixed bag, you could say. There were certainly tensions that erupted, but at the same time, Jews often did look to the monarchy for their safety and security. And sometimes there were, and frequently, almost every Moroccan monarch had Jews close to the palace who worked as, worked and held important positions and so forth. And this in turn would ensure, usually under normal circumstances, generally peaceful relations between Muslims and Jews in Morocco. But it's a complicated, great question, but really complicated. Yeah, back there.
Thank you very much. That was really very, very enlightening. I want you to know that in Moroccan homes, during the war, there was always the picture of Mohammed
Yeah.
and also FDR. Because everybody did. The only comment I would like to add is that we sometimes forget that the reason that the Moroccan Jews did not suffer from the Holocaust is because the Americans landed first. If the Americans delayed even by a few months, who knows what would happen?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Let us
yeah.
stand up to the pressures that were put on him by the Vichy government, but it's because of the Operation Torch, and because of the first landing in Bourg-Yoté, Nifla, that's my town. The Americans, they were able to save the whole Jewish community. So the Americans, listen, be proud of the GIs, they are the ones who saved the Jews.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, absolutely. Who knows what would have happened had the Vichy rule continued? And of course, Vichy, in a sense, came to an end with Operation Torch, and then the French occupied the unoccupied zone in France and so forth. But of course, that turned things around dramatically, although not immediately, because there were also repercussions the way the Jews were, welcomed the Americans when they came, as you point out, and it led to a lot of tension and even rioting in different parts of Morocco, and sometimes the violence was even abetted by the French authorities who were kept in place from the Vichy regime, which incidentally the Americans also, there were plenty of anti-Semitic soldiers and leaders as well who were not very much concerned about the fate of the Jews and who were willing to keep the Vichy authorities in place as well. But you're absolutely right. Of course, had that not happened, who knows what their fate may have been, for sure. Yes.
So, is there truth then to the story that in 1492, with the expulsion, that Jews were welcomed in Morocco, Naples, and the Ottoman Empire? That's my understanding. Is that true, or historically that?
Yeah. I mean, it is essentially true. Jews started pouring into Morocco even before 1492 during the persecutions of the late 14th century. Jews often found refuge, especially in Fez. In fact, I think one of the reasons they ended up building a separate Jewish quarters, there were tensions in the city because there were so many Jews, they were sort of competing over space in the city, and so the Sultan also built this protective wall around the Jews to avoid conflict. But it is true that the Moroccans saw great utility in Jewish settlement there, and they often played important roles, in Morocco as a result. And that was true also with the Ottoman Empire as well, and only certain parts of Italy was it possible. Yeah.
My husband was part of the group that landed in, I don't know where they landed.
Casablanca or Algiers.
He didn't fight. And he said he went to some event and he met this nice girl, and that, it was very loose, and this girl said, "Would you come to my house?" And he said, "What do you do?" She said, "My dad's a farmer." Well, he goes to this apartment, gorgeous French furniture. But he said, "Where's the farm?" "Well, it's a plantation." I mean, they had money. This was a great deal of concentration of Jewish money. He said, end of the war. So there must have been that type of population.
Yeah. I mean, there were Of course, most Moroccan Jews were really very poor and simple artisans and so forth. There were many even rural areas, but there was certainly a wealthy class, and of course interest in expropriating their money and businesses, and especially some of the European settlers. But it wasn't, even there, it wasn't always so certain, because they could have, even among anti-Semitic European settlers, they also had much to lose, as working with Jewish businesses and so forth. So, it was a complicated situation for sure. Yes.
How much of the Moroccan Jewish community left for Israel when Israel was established, and why?
And why? Yeah, I mean, when Israel was established in 1948, of course you had some Moroccan Jews who began flowing out of the country to Israel. Both the attraction of the new Jewish state, but also their concern about their future, right? And there were economic reasons too. They were poor, they were seeking better lives and so forth. And there were political reasons as well. In the years, though, that preceded Moroccan independence in 1956 and the 1950s, violence was growing. There was an anti-colonial struggle. Jews were particularly concerned about what would happen in a future independent Arab state, as Morocco was heading towards independence. And so there was a lot of fears about the future. And so the flow began, and there were thousands upon thousands of Jews who came to Israel in 1952, 53. The Moroccans were the largest community coming to Israel, which has also created tensions in Israel as well. So complicated reasons. Of course, some stayed. About half the community was still there after independence. Then the exodus, you could say, was more gradual. But then, by then, many of their families, their connection, Israel in a sense became a part of this larger world of Moroccan Jews, and it became the biggest center. Of course, many went to France and elsewhere, and Montreal, French speaking, and some to the United States. Los Angeles was a pretty big destination, but this was a somewhat later emigration. Okay. Yes.
What is the status of Moroccan Jews in Israel today?
Well, a lot has changed for sure, but there's still heavy concentrations of Moroccan Jews in poor development towns, as they're called, and so there's still a lot of sort of resentment and bitterness about how they've been regarded and received in Israeli society. On the other hand, many more have been integrated into the sort of political elites and universities, and also there's been a lot more intermarriage and so forth. So now when you talk about Moroccan Jews, actually interestingly, if you're the offspring of one Moroccan Jewish parent, you're still regarded as a subject of Morocco by the king, incidentally. So the numbers are greater now because of there's more of a mixture, but there's still a lot of sort of ethnic identity is strong, partly I think because of this feeling of deprivation and discrimination, but also sort of rediscovering their roots and so forth. Yes.
Same question. What's the situation of Moroccan Jews in Morocco? Numbers and positions.
Yeah. You ask anyone about numbers, they'll give you a different figure because there's still a lot. There's a lot of coming and going that happens, and a good guess would be somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000. So it's a very minute number today compared to what once was. And in fact, my experience is that apart from, let's say, in Casablanca, where there's still a Jewish presence, you talk to any young Moroccan and they don't even imagine that Jews were once indigenous to the country. They don't. A Jew is like someone from New York or an Israeli or something. So it's kind of a negative view in that sense of the Jew, with no consciousness that the Jews were once, ubiquitous in Morocco, found it everywhere in rural, urban areas throughout the country. But their situation there is, they're not in danger. There's still the presence of, the king's minister and so forth, who's you see him prominently on Moroccan TV and so forth. So, there's still a community there, but much diminished.
Well, I know there are many hands, and this has been a wonderful talk that has sparked a lot of discussion. So I'd like to invite everybody to continue the conversation over the reception right next door. And again, join me in thanking Daniel for a wonderful talk.